Welcome into Nick and Friends. It's a third episode here, taking you through the 6 o'clock hour on your Friday night. Obviously, your host, Nick Sainer. You're listening to Nick and Friends on 93.7 The Ticket and theticketfm.com. Before we get rolling with our guest, I want to thank the Carpe Diem team of Nebraska Realty for sponsoring the podcast. As always, whether you're looking for a new place to call home or even trying to sell your current home, you want to make it as easy as possible. So why not use a realtor that works hard so you don't have to? Give the Carpe Diem team of Nebraska Realty a call today at 402 429 8121 for all your residential and commercial needs. As always, you guys know how to tap into the show. 402 464 5685, the Honda Lincoln hotline, the Starter Heyman text line, both those open for you guys throughout the duration of the show, as well as on the Starter Heyman Jewelers video stream, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, as well as Allo Channel 951, as we take you through the 6 o'clock hour on your Friday night. Now, I'll be honest right off the bat here. I'm on vacation at the time that you guys are listening to this, so we are pre-recording this just 2 days before I head up to the lake to just hang out for the weekend. So we're going to keep the conversation as present as possible, and to do that, bring in a very special best friend of mine. Also doubles as a youth instructor at DBAT Lincoln. He also coaches at Nebraska Wesleyan, and that is Mason Bennett. Mason, my man, appreciate you hanging out with me tonight.
Yeah, great to be here, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So Mason, let's just start at the top, right? So you're a guy. You were initially from Denver, right? The Denver area, and you choose to play baseball at Nebraska Wesleyan. Talk about your youth. Talk about how you started playing baseball, who you played for, just kind of your background. I know it obviously, but the listeners don't. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I actually originally grew up here in Lincoln. I was born and raised here in Lincoln, lived 2 blocks north of the Nebraska Wesleyan campus. So I moved to Denver when I was 14 years old. I played select ball my whole life, playing for the Lincoln Dodgers. So I played there my whole life and then moved to Denver. Family jobs took us there. I went to 2 different high schools out there. So I went through a little transfer phase my sophomore year. And then the opportunity came along to play baseball at Wesleyan. And I mean, moving back home, close to family, extended family, it was kind of a no brainer. Played there for 5 years and then transitioned to a coaching role. So, yeah, that's kind of how I ended up here.
We're going to talk about the coaching role and how it's kind of been a tale of two seasons. It's looking at these last 2 years, right? And you've changed the leadership, obviously, a new head coach last season and things like that. But first off, I mean, talk about how difficult it can be at times to get recruited, right? Because now you've seen, obviously, as a coach and as a player, and we'll kind of revisit the coach thing later. But as a player from out of state, right, and people think Nebraska Wesleyan or think of a program that's not Division 1 or 2 even, and you say, oh, they're looking at in-state guys. They're going to look are just around the city because it's going to be easiest to get those guys. You're going to know about Nebraska Wesleyan. You're going to know about Doane, things like that. Talk about your recruiting process or kind of how you not only found Nebraska Wesleyan because you said that you were obviously in Lincoln before, but just how you made your way back to Lincoln and back to Wesleyan.
Yeah, so my recruiting experience is not typical compared to most guys that I played with. A lot of the guys I played with are local guys. We did have a lot of non-local guys, but for me, it was I knew Nebraska Wesleyan. I had a buddy that was going there, and I was like, hey, like I reached out to their head coach and I said, hey, like I'm interested in playing for you guys. Send him some of my information, send him some video, and he had me come out for a camp, a team camp, and he saw me play, and he decided, hey, like you're good enough to play here. So I think at this level, sometimes it takes willingness to step out of your comfort zone, and just say, hey, here's what I got for you. And then obviously there are players that, I mean, through events and showcases that we find guys, but we also have some guys that just reach out or come on a campus visit and say, hey, I'm interested in baseball. And, sometimes, I mean, sometimes they turn out to be, diamonds in the rough. I wouldn't say I'm a diamond in the rough, but like, I mean, that's kind of how they how they found me. So, yeah. So that's kind of, I mean, mine's not it's not typical at all compared to most
I
guys. So,
I think it's so interesting because you look at whether it's division, I mean Division 2, Division 3, JUCO, and like all those. I don't want to say lesser, lower levels, right? Because Division 1, we see it on the College World Series that's going on right now. It's super flashy, right? These guys that were top 50 recruits and now they're top 10 on MLB draft boards and things like that. But 95% of recruiting is not like that, and it doesn't have those stories. And so what I always found so fascinating about JUCO ball and about Division 2 and Division 3 baseball is that you are the tarp pullers, you're the field rakers, you are getting up at 6 a.m. to do the nasty, dirty work, and then guess what? You still got to go to school as a full time student and somehow juggle baseball on top of it. I mean, it's the JUCO guys and the Division 2 and 3 guys are just kind of a different type of breed, and we've seen stories like that where guys will go and hop up from a Division 2 level and go up to a Division 1 level just because they're such grinders and they just love the game of baseball, right? If you go to a JUCO site, it's just guys that just love baseball because they might not have the best grades, they might not have the best attitude, but they just want to play baseball.
I think that's why staying Division 3 has always been something of interest. I think everyone that is there wants to be there. I'm not knocking guys at Division 1 level. I think there's plenty of guys the exact same way. But I mean, if you're a Division 3, Division 2, JUCO, NAIA baseball player, you want to be there. You're not necessarily in it. Obviously, at the Division 3 level, we don't even offer athletic scholarship.
Mhm.
So we really, I mean, we're doing all the dirty work. You're getting up at 6 a.m. for a team lift, and then you got class from 8 to 11, and then you might have like a hitting group or like a some sort of individual workout at like 1 o'clock, and then we have team practice at 3, and then you might have, I mean, then you obviously have to fit lunch in there, dinner. Sometimes we have study halls for our guys too, to
Mhm.
help them academically, and some guys have night class, so it's a grind for sure. But the guys that we get, they know what they're getting into beforehand, and usually they embrace it wholeheartedly. So
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to like the part of you coaching, right? The coach Mason Bennett, because and once again, 402-464-5685 Honda Lincoln Hotline, the Starter Heyman text line. You can also ask questions on the video stream, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch. Can't ask questions on Twitter, but I mean, if you reply, I guess we'll see them at the time. But I guess Mason, this is a generalized question, but talk about just the jump from being a player and being a guy that's played on the field for 5 years. And I remember there'd be days where we were hanging out, and it was like I gotta watch not like what I do or how I act, but I got to remember that now I'm their coach and I'm not their teammates. So talk about the difficulty in that transition, if there was any, and then just kind of how you've learned and adapted to your new position as coach rather than teammate.
yeah, it's probably that's probably the hardest thing that I've ever had to go through as a person. Nick, you know me, I'm like fairly introverted. So it kind of started like this coaching thing started my junior year. Like we had a new head coach. He's no longer with us. He has a job in Tennessee now. And he kind of embraced it when he came in that I was a guy that was going to be some sort of leadership role. And he put me in some very uncomfortable situations where I had to lead when I might necessarily not wanted to. He knew I wanted to coach in the future. I didn't know that I wanted to be a college coach at that time. But anyways, going into that transitionary phase, I graduated. One of our assistant coaches was actually a player from the year before. And he just decided, hey, coaching is not really something I want to do in the future, or he kind of wanted to get like that. I mean, we're part-time assistants, so he got a full-time job, and it necessarily didn't work out schedule-wise. Anyways, so we had that opening. I reached out to my head coach, and he was like, 100%. We'd love to have you on board, and I'm so blessed to have teammates and now some of my players that embraced it right away. I had seniors that the hardest thing, surprisingly, was calling me coach. Like they wanted to call me Mason or Coach Mason, which is, at the college level, that's kind of I mean, it's Coach Bennett.
Yeah.
So they embraced it. It took a couple days, couple weeks, but guys embraced it, and by the end of the year, I mean, they were awesome, and I'm really looking forward to my second year with these guys. So
Once again, Nick and Friends were sponsored by the Carpe Diem team in Nebraska Realty. Give them a call today, 402-429-8121. Now, you said something earlier about how you didn't know you wanted to be a college coach just a couple years ago. And I know you also double as a high school coach during the summer, so we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But why a college coach? What are some of your favorite parts about being at the college level?
yeah, so the first thing that got me into wanting to be a college coach was my cousin. His name's Peyton Pocock. He was actually an assistant at Wesleyan when I was a junior and senior, I believe. He was our pitching coach, and I kind of didn't really think coaching at the college level was really something that I could even do. I didn't know I was necessarily qualified to do it. I saw him do it, and I was like, okay, like I've been looking up to this guy my whole life, might as well do it. My family, my great grandpa actually was the head football coach at UNK for a long time. His name's Al Zickman. He's people in the Kearney area probably know who he is. He's kind of a legend around those parts. So,
Mhm.
just kind of wanting to follow in those footsteps. I have a lot of coaches in my family, and the college level. It's the best part is these guys are on their own. They're learning to mature and become young men, and anything you can do to help them become better people, better fathers, and just help them kind of figure this life thing out on their own is something it's really fun to see some guys. I mean, I see guys that I played with my whole career. They just graduated. They got full-time jobs at companies here in Lincoln, or they're playing one of my teammates, two of my teammates, old teammates and players are now playing pro ball. So just kind of cool to see all that transpire and just see them grow.
Well, I mean, and one of those former teammates is a mutual friend of ours. Shout out to Derek Colbush playing up in Montana. But I guess okay, so you talk about just that growth that goes on, and you underwent it, right, as a player, because I
Mm.
mean that's part of the job at hand. When you go to college is just growing up and learn how to be an adult. How difficult can that be? How difficult are those conversations as a coach to a player who was your former teammate when it's, dude, you got to get you know what in line, right? You got to get this
Mm.
figured out. How tough are those conversations maneuvering that not only as a first year coach, but also as somebody that is a little younger, right? And then
Mm.
also was a former teammate of the guy you're talking to.
Yeah, so I would say it's easier than I thought it would be, just because the role I was in as a player was a leadership role to some degree, where
Mhm.
there are points where you're gonna have to get on a guy just because they're not necessarily doing things the right way, or they are, acting out of line in some way. So it was a lot easier than I thought. Now I'm still trying to figure stuff out myself. I wouldn't say I'm the most even keel guy. I got it figured out because I'm 24
Mhm.
years old. There's a lot of things that I still have to learn. I still have to become a much more patient individual, and I'm learning that over time. And it's just kind of like just learning from experience and like trying to relate with these guys. I want to be a guy that can put my arm around them and help explain things, because this is such a wide generation. Every time you tell them something or like teach them something, the first question is why, and you
Mhm.
have to explain why. And I feel like I can relate to those guys, but it's also like, they have their full trust in me. At least I'm pretty sure they do. I hope they do.
Yeah.
But it's easier than I thought it would be. So
I guess it's so fascinating that whole entire just the way that coaches have to handle nowadays, especially not only situations on the field but off the field. I'm not saying that they didn't have to do that, 10, 15 years ago when we were growing up playing, but it seems like it's magnified on a whole nother level nowadays. Okay, last one as we kind of put a bow on Nebraska Westland, and you during your time there. You're going into your second year. Next season will be your second year as an assistant coach at Nebraska Westland for baseball. I mean, you guys 2 years ago in your fifth year, you played pretty well. You had a really strong season, not as quite of a successful season in year one. What needs to change? What was the difference maker? What's there to look forward to in year two for you?
I would say, what went wrong, I mean, it's just transitionary period. We have a new head coach. You have a senior class that's been taught to do things one way and
Mhm.
necessary, and I mean, humans are creatures of habit, like they don't like change. So, it took time to kind of get through that transitionary phase, especially since we hired our head coach in November. So we had our fall season. The fall season typically is where you do your introducing of theories and different things that coaches like to have you do situationally. I mean, something as small as your lead at first base or third base, like
Mhm.
something as small as that is taught in the fall. And like we had to run through this all come January 20th, and we were playing in 3, 4 weeks. So that this whole year was kind of a learning phase. A lot of inexperience too. So my class that graduated was very, very experienced. I mean, we had guys that were 3, 4, 5 year
Mhm.
starters. So it's this year we have a little more experience, and I'm really looking forward to it, just having that full season with our staff. So,
Okay, so I thought of a couple more things that I want to talk about just to let the listeners know because I fortunately enough, obviously with you and I being so close and such great friends, which is kind of crazy to think about because we barely knew each other if at all about a year and a half ago, and as I mentioned, Derek Kolbush, I think the first time you and I met Mason was at his engagement party that was at our house, and that
mm,
was what was that 2 Decembers ago, and now I mean here we are. We just went up to the College World Series together on Monday and stuff like that, and it's kind of just crazy how things can happen so quickly. But when you I was hanging out with you. I remember during that transitional period when Nebraska Wesleyan was still searching for their head coach, and you were tagged as kind of the interim guy, right? And as a first year guy, you were kind of the one that had to step up and take a lot of the responsibility there. And I guess talk about that period and how much you learned about yourself being able to lead a bunch of guys that were your former teammates.
yeah. So that whole phase, that whole 3, 4 months where it was me and Coach Van Dyke. So he's a guy that coached me as an outfielder, and he was our
Mhm.
pitching coach. Him and I were in charge of our fall. Just because our previous head coach had left for a new job in July. So it was kind of like we couldn't turn it around quick enough. I think it was awesome, but it was also the scariest moment of my life, throwing me straight into the fire. Coach Van Dyke also, he was working a full-time job, and
Mhm.
luckily I wasn't, just because I was fresh out of college, so I was giving lessons on the side, and I was kind of fortunate enough that I could put a little more effort into this thing, and just to have someone on campus for these guys, like 2 to 3 hours a day at the field in the fall, going through our daily individual workouts and then our team practice. I remember being at the field from 10 a.m. till about 7:30, 8 p.m. just for individuals and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
they needed that presence, and I think they saw how much I put into it, and I think that really made it easy. I relied on some senior leadership, some guys that have been around, to help out. But I mean, it was tough, but it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about myself as a coach and a person, and so I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it was tough.
Once again, we're Mason Bennett is our guest. He's an assistant coach at Nebraska Wesleyan for the baseball program. Played there for 5 years, and then transitioned into a coaching role. Now coaches at Wesleyan and has a full time job in an administrative position at Wesleyan, as well as teaching, instructing baseball lessons on the side here in Lincoln to youth baseball players. So I guess one last one. Now that I promise this will be the last one on Nebraska Wesleyan, as you play a pretty large role in the recruiting process right now as a coach, and so you just showed me a couple of days ago that you got a new list of guys, and I know you can't specifically name them off and talk about them, but just talk about that recurring cycle of calling guys, messaging guys, talking to guys, right? Because to be honest, you are Nebraska Wesleyan, and it's not as we alluded to earlier in the show. It's not Division One. It's not Nebraska. It's not South Carolina. There's a lot of groundwork, right, and a lot of the gritty, dirty work that's got to be put in foundationally for guys that are 3 years down the road or 2 years down the road, I should say. So talk about just the recruiting process from a coach's standpoint and kind of how you maneuver and orchestrate your recruiting process.
Yeah, so obviously, since our head coach is kind of he's the only full-time coach on staff, in terms of like full-time coaching role, he kind of takes the majority of the weight when it comes to recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, we have our lists of guys that we've gone through, and all three of me and our two other coaches have both kind of found guys that we like, and we send them to each other and talk to each other about them, and then obviously, I mean, the first thing you do is just give them a call and say, "Hey, we're Nebraska
Yeah.
Wesleyan Division III school. Feel free to look us up, and hopefully they're interested. And if they are, we'll just keep reaching out to them." Also, my administrative role is in admissions, so I know a lot of the behind the scenes stuff when it comes to financial aid and like just understanding the entire recruitment process. Because I mean, these student athletes, like, we recruit them, but they also have to meet certain standards to get into our
Mm-hmm.
institution, and just kind of helping them through all that as well. So I kind of get all sides of it. Typically, our other two coaches are main recruiters, but I also help just from the admissions side of things, and then also I handle a lot of the athletes from Colorado just because I'm from there.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's constant calling, texting, reaching out to guys, and it's about to get really busy really fast. And I'm really looking forward to it. I love meeting new kids, and you know, it's so easy to sell a school. I don't like saying sell, but like convince a kid to come to school here because you
Mm-hmm.
lived it for 5 years, and now this is year 7 at Wesleyan coming up. So I've lived it. I've been through it. It's so easy. So um, I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it. So it's fun. But I mean, yeah, that's really it.
Okay, so once again, we're hanging out with Mason Bennett, assistant coach at Nebraska Wesleyan. Also gives baseball lessons on the side when he's not working full time at Wesleyan or being on the diamond as the Wesleyan assistant coach. Now, okay, so let's walk slowly into this deep, dark well of youth sports. Okay, because I this is a conversation I love to have, and we have a really interesting perspective with our history of being at DBAT Lincoln, right? And so while we've seen not only just individual work, but also team practices and how parents handle their children, whether it's baseball or softball. I think this is a conversation that gets visited on my shows every few months because I think it's important to just continue to plant the seed in parents' heads and just listeners' heads that it's not all about you, right? And that's like super super dark and aggressive right out of the gate. I mean, but just talk about from your vantage point as somebody that's given lessons for a couple years now, and you've built up a clientele and you've built up yourself to be one of our or one I should say not our one of DBAT's most popular instructors. Talk about what you've learned about youth sports and how you've seen it kind of evolve just in the few short years that you've been instructing lessons.
Yeah, I think back to when I played, and as a kid, I was pretty blind to a lot of the like behind the scenes stuff with
Mm-hmm.
parents. But through these past few years, I imagine it went on with my team. I loved the team that I was on, the Dodgers. I played with those guys my whole life. So, but but I didn't realize until I got to this college side of things, starting to give lessons, like how toxic it can be. I think the big thing is just not pushing kids to do something they don't want to do. I remember a little personal story. I played basketball in high school my freshman year,
Mm-hmm.
and I was 5'3" as a freshman. I was not big. I was not that good. And I played, I was like the eighth man, on our freshman team.
Mhm.
And the second year came around and I was going to workouts and I just wasn't enjoying it. And I am so blessed that my family, when I told them I didn't want to play anymore, that they were like, "Hey, we are 100% behind you." So watching some kids come in and, there's kids that don't want to be there and then there's kids that do. I just want to make it as fun as I can for them. You can read within about the first 5 minutes if the kid wants to be there.
Mhm.
So I think, just being honest with the parents is one thing that's really important. And then also just, trying to find a way to make it the most enjoyable thing, whether it's a 30-minute lesson, hour lesson, like trying to make it as enjoyable for the kid as possible because baseball is such a fun game for me growing up and it's my life. And just trying to pass on that love and that fun for the kid is something that I find to be very important more than the lesson itself.
Now, just to provide a little more context for our listeners, Mason, you're working with kids and baseball players ranging from age 8 or 7, even at times, I'm sure, to high school guys. And so,
Mm.
so you've been able to see, guys just starting out that are figuring out not only if they enjoy playing baseball and hitting the ball off the tee in the process of practicing and getting instruction, but also the guys that are just trying to fine tune their work. And so you've seen it on both sides or both ends of the conversation. What's so you mentioned the whole they allowed me to quit, or I don't want to say it like that because it insinuates that you're just weren't doing anything, right? What's that fine line between if you don't enjoy something, right? It's such a fine line because you don't want the youth not doing anything, not participating, but you also don't want to make their lives miserable by forcing them to participate.
Yeah, I think, you let them try it, but like I think if the kid's gotten to a point where they are willing to say, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore," that's the point where you kind of have to let
Mhm.
them go. For me, I know when I'm going to be a parent, I'm going to want my kid to play baseball,
Yeah.
softball, whatever that may be. I'm probably going to put them in it, but if push comes to shove down the road, even if it's a year, 2 years, I'm not going to force you.
Well,
I,
and that's
it's such a hard line to walk.
And that's where it's like it's so difficult because that's where the sentence or the phrase that I said about it's not all about you when we kind of started this conversation was exactly to your point right there because we've seen it so many times not only in the facilities but also when we went to you games. I'm sure you see it at the high school level. A lot of parents unfortunately live vicariously through through their baseball or softball player, and so that's when I think when you step back and say, okay, am I paying this player fee, right, or this tournament fee or this gate fee? Am I paying it, every weekend or every year to watch them play, or for me to be involved in them playing, right? And so I think that's like such an important question you have to ask because I think also a lot of times you learn about yourself a lot as somebody going, all right, am I doing this for myself or am I doing this for somebody else?
Yep. Yep. It's very evident like when we are at the facility that we both work at, like you can see when a parent is trying to live
Hmm.
vicariously through their child. It's very apparent. Um I would say personally I was blessed like both my parents did not. They're both
Yeah.
good athletes. Both my parents were great athletes and my dad was one of my coaches my whole life and he pushed me like hard and, I am someone that takes on that challenge, but there are some kids that just do not do well with that pushing, and
Yeah.
that can ruin the fun for a sport in general. And I've seen kids in that facility go in there and their parent is pushing them too far, and you can see on their body language, like, I don't want to be here. This isn't fun. You can watch the parent rip the game out of the kid's hands right in front of your face, and there's really not much you can do about it, and it's
Hmm.
heartbreaking.
Well, that's what's wild. And once again, feel free to chime in on this conversation, folks. 402-464-5685. You can also reach out to me, Nick underscore Sainer. You can find Mason on Twitter. Mason, I apologize. I don't know your Twitter username. off the top of my head.
Mason Bennett, 27.
Perfect. So there you go. So you can reach out to either one of us if you want to interact with us. Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter. We're hanging out with Mason Bennett, assistant coach at Nebraska Westland. Also instructs young baseball players at a local facility here in Lincoln. But I guess a couple more minutes here before we kind of wrap it up and put a bow on it. Um, Going back to something you said is that if a child or if a player is strong enough to say something or is comfortable enough to say something, I think you put stock in that, right? Because I've said it before on the air, and I just kind of want to get your thoughts on this, Mason, as we kind of wrap up this youth sports discussion. I remember myself as like a 10-year old or an 11-year-old, and I wasn't like an exceptional player growing up in 7-8 years old. I started out playing in the junior Saw Dogs, right, which is it's a little bit above YMCA but below select baseball, because frankly my parents didn't want to pay the talent, or not the talent fee, the player fee for select baseball. And at age 10, my coach finally emailed my parents and was like, listen, I've taught Nick everything he knows, like I can. It's time for him to move up. um, but I remember like sitting there and my parents having the conversation of like, is baseball something you seriously want to pursue, right? And I think we were both fortunate enough to have parents that kind of raised us a similar way. But as a 12-year-old, the one last thing I wanted to do was disappoint my parents or let my parents down. And although, and I mean, we're both in the same boat and super fortunate for this, although it would have crushed my parents and I'm sure your parents if we would have went to them and say, "Hey, listen, I just don't love baseball anymore." I wasn't afraid of what they might do or what they might say or how they might react. And so nowadays, if you if there is a player that does have a parent that lives vicariously through them and is paying all this money for the parent rather than for the player, and the player just doesn't enjoy it, but is still strong enough to say, "Hey, mom, hey, dad, I just don't want to do it anymore. I don't love it," even though they're scared of how their mom or dad might react. That's really really deep, because I think you need to put a lot of stock into that.
Yeah, I mean, these baseball is not a cheap sport either. Like all the equipment, all the
Hmm.
fees, all the tournaments, hotels, stuff like that. I think it's worth, if I'm a parent, it's worth going to my kid before every season and saying, "Hey, do you want to do this?" Like, and I want to make sure it's okay. Like, I am 24 years old, single. I don't plan on having kids anytime soon,
Oh,
but
come
like,
on.
yeah, I come on now, come on. Uh, but like it's worth having that conversation. Are you interested before I go spend X amount of money on these hotels and tournaments? Am I wasting you could be spending money that could be spent elsewhere on education or a different sport. Like I'm thinking like I've heard you rant about this over and
Yeah.
over. It seems like every time I listen to you, I hear it. So I remember that what comes to
Dang, I need to
mind is like,
stop. I need to stop then.
yeah, like what comes to mind is the story of you giving the lesson to the kid that would rather be
Yeah.
working on a science project, right?
Yeah.
Um, if that's me and I hear like a kid say that, like if I'm giving a lesson, like part of me wants to say, all right, let's sit down and do your science project here for an hour.
Hmm.
Like I would rather your parent spend that money on something that they would rather, something they would rather do. And I think the parent, whether they like it or not, whether it's athletics or not, would agree they'd rather spend it elsewhere that's going to make their kid happy. Because in the end, we want our kids to be happy. And sure, it might be heartbreaking, it might be hard to hear, but like, I mean, down the road, do you want your money to be spent in the right way, or do you want to be forcing money down something? I mean, it would be forcing money down a garbage chute, just because, yeah. So
And that's so interesting because like you just basically explained a scenario where as whether you're an instructor and if there's any sport, just sports instructors, whether it's football, whether it's basketball, whether it's baseball, softball, it doesn't matter. um if you're listening to this, or if you're a coach, like, you just perfectly explained the multitasking or multi jobs that come with being a coach. And and being a mentor and being somebody that, hey, if you are scared to talk about a certain thing as a player, if you're nervous and you need some advice, right? A lot of players will go to their coaches, right? Because that's their they spend so much time with them that they become either a second parent figure. And I still know, like, my high school coaches in the summer, I still text with them every couple of days. I mean, you know him. I'll say his name, Alex Heidemann. Like, Heidi and I will text back and forth every few days, and he's just an awesome guy. But now I spent so much time and I got so much from him, and our just so many hours of practicing and working out and all this, that whenever I still at 22 years old need advice, obviously, like, Heidi's one of the dudes I'll text, and it's because he built he structured this foundation both on coaching and mentoring on the field, but also off the field. I mean, I don't think there's anything more valuable than that, and that's something that, on the positive side, youth sports does provide us, is that opportunity to build relationships not only with coaches but also with your teammates. And you said it earlier that you were super lucky to play on an organization like the Dodgers, that you loved your teammates. I was fortunate with the same thing with the Sox. Like, we didn't play at the highest level, and I there's so many times that my teammates, or my former teammates that would leave our team, would go, "Why don't you move up to a majors team? Why don't you move up to a AAA team?" I think one thing that my family realized and my parents helped me understand was, like, it's a rarity now to get a group of teammates, a group of parents, a group of families that all get along so well that, hey, even if you're not competing at the highest level, at 10 years old, nobody gives a crap. At 10 years old, nobody's going to be looking back at age 20 going, "Oh, what was I doing when I was 10 years old? I remember that Memorial Day tournament in Des Moines," right? And so I think there's sometimes we lose sight of the most important things, and it's building that foundational relationship with not only your coaches but also your teammates.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that my college coach, Coach Ripel, he would always talk about the things you're going to remember when you're done playing.
Mhm.
You are going to remember some wins and losses, but you're not going to remember a ton of them. I think back to my Dodger days. I remember probably like 3 games, like
Yeah.
genuinely. I
Mhm.
remember winning a state championship when we were 8. Can't believe we had a state championship at 8 years old. But
That's
like,
wild. I never got that. Dang, man. I
yeah,
never got that.
but like, don't remember it.
We rolled into Aurora's state tournament, or I think our state tournament was like Aurora, and we were the number one seed. And we lost to the 16 seed, like 10-0, and it was like, this is all it's about. This is what happens. So go ahead, I cut you off.
Yeah, it's just like you're not going to remember the wins and losses. You're not. I remember my last college game, how we lost, but the thing that always comes fresh in my mind is our relationships. Um, the times off the field, it's the bus rides, it's the team
Mhm.
game nights that we had, it's the bowling nights, it's all of those things. The team beat ups trips where we get BOGO wings every Thursday. Like it's those things that I remember
Mhm.
over the wins and the losses and the hard times. I mean, obviously, we make great memories in the weight room, have a lot of fun, but, like, I don't remember the lifts that we're doing. I remember hanging out with my teammates in the weight room.
Mhm.
I remember my select team, us hanging in the hotel room playing PlayStation 2 video games. That kinda dated me a little bit, but,
Yeah.
it's, that's what you're gonna remember.
Well,
The first question they're gonna ask you when they look back on my college career, first question is gonna be, "Were you guys any good?"
mhm.
And then the next thing you're gonna talk about were probably your teammates. You're not gonna talk about how many games you won. You
Yeah.
will, but then it's like from there, it's you're gonna talk about relationships and people that you met. Those are gonna be the fresh things that come to mind. So
Well, and that was something that was like, so I'm going to bring in Nebraska softball really quickly, because Jordy Ball just spoke to the media a couple days ago, or earlier this week, and she said something along the lines of, like, I realized there was a time when I was down in Oklahoma that I realized that winning a national championship is great, but it's not as great as I thought it would be when there's not the people around me to celebrate it. And that was a big reason why she returned home, right? And so I don't know, like as this is a really cool episode, obviously, Mason. I hope it is for you. It is for me because like as we're talking about this, reminiscing on like we talked about our buddy Derek, right? And I'm sure we're gonna text Derek in our group chat telling him that, hey, we talked about you on the radio. But like,
Can't boost his ego.
yeah,
He
he
can't
can't
boost
boost
his
his,
ego.
yeah, exactly.
He's
But
already playing pro ball. He's
shout
gotten
out to
enough ego.
shout out to the Great Falls Voyagers and stuff. But like you look at the evolution, like obviously you've known Derek longer than I have because you guys played together growing up. Derek was a junior in high school when I was a freshman, right? And I remember like high school Derek. And then like Derek and I kind of stopped. Hey, we never really hung out. We stopped talking. We stopped, communicating because we're never that close of friends. And then it was like then we started living together and we started to hang out more. And he graduated. He set records at Wesleyan, had a really productive career. And you want to talk about these relationships? Well, you and I were both in his wedding just a couple weeks ago. Like the evolution of how we've all grown up together is something that's just so valuable. That as an instructor, as a coach, as a mentor, it's painful, right? To see a player of yours not getting those kind of benefits from the sport they're playing or whatever activity that they're participating in.
Yep. I mean, yeah, it comes back to that point of, do they really enjoy this?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to make those friendships playing something that you don't enjoy? Because realistically, those bonds that I made with Derek and some other guys on those teams, like, it started with baseball. When we
Yeah.
were in the hotel room, we were playing wiffle ball outside the hotel in the back. We were playing MVP baseball on the PS2.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you don't enjoy that, how are you going to build those relationships? And I mean, down the road, that's going to be the driving factor of whether you had
Mm-hmm.
fond memories of the sport, and if it was a good experience. So, yeah, it all comes back to that one point.
Okay, so now last one before we wrap it up. Once again, we're joined by Mason Bennett, assistant coach for Nebraska Wesleyan baseball. Also instructs lessons. We're kind of talking. We talked earlier in the show about his Wesleyan days, and obviously they're still going on, but his Wesleyan days as a player, and then how they transitioned into a coach, and now just kind of youth sports overall. We mentioned kind of what your schedule looks like recruiting wise from a coach's perspective. But if there are parents of high school players, if there are high school players listening to this, right? What's your advice to them? Because a lot of the kids they're not going to be able to make it Division 1, right? And that's okay. I feel like sometimes we frown upon guys that play at at lower levels of baseball when in reality those guys are just as important as sometimes Division 1 guys are to a program. And so what's your advice to high school players that want to play college ball, but also are mature enough to understand, hey, I'm not going to go play at an SEC school. I'm not going to go play at a Big Ten school. I need to look at Division 2, Division 3. I need to look at those levels. What's your advice? How do they reach out? How do they as a player begin that process?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, it's hard when money is, if you have money's tight, but it's definitely
Mm-hmm.
manageable. If you are good enough, schools will find you.
Yeah.
It's a matter of realizing and being mature enough to recognize, okay, maybe I'm not a Division 1 baseball player.
Yeah.
There are some dudes at every level, and if you are good enough at that level, you can go up like a JUCO guy going up to Division 1.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have two guys in the past 2 years that have gone to play pro ball from our school. So if that's something you want to go into, I mean, Division 3 isn't the worst thing.
Yeah.
There was a guy that we played against a couple years ago that was a Golden Spikes finalist. Sorry, I'm getting off track, but like,
Yeah.
if you want to get recruited, um, first of all, don't be afraid to reach out. Reach out to coaches. Find their emails on the school's website. Reach out. Worst case, they're either not going to respond or say no, but at least you tried,
Yeah.
right? Second thing, when it comes to being on the field, it's 100% effort, great attitude, 100% energy. Those are the three things you can control: effort, attitude, energy. and it's being the best teammate you can be regardless of your role. I think the high school team that I am coaching this summer, they are going through this phase where they are learning I have to be a great teammate when I
Mhm.
am not playing or when things are not going well. That's why I like high school. I think you can really develop kids to be great people going into their college days. But I mean, it's just finding a way to give 100% effort, 100% attitude, 100% energy for 2 to 4 hours a day. That's all you
Yeah.
got to give me as a coach. That's all you got to give me. And if I'm watching a game and I see a kid that is, you know, I'll put this story out there. I was at the state tournament. I believe it was a Class C game. I can't remember who. Dude on the mound, number one, is pitching for whoever.
Mhm.
He goes 5, 6 innings in the state tournament. He shoves. He dominates a little bit. He struggles in his last inning of work. He comes out. He's a little frustrated with himself. He goes he goes to the corner of the dugout. Mind you, I think myself and my cousin I was there watching the game with were the only two guys watching him just
Mhm.
because we are both college coaches or have been or currently are college coaches.
Yeah.
We watched him go to the dugout. He had a little moment in the corner where he just kind of he sat down, caught his breath, was frustrated with himself, and then he got up right when the game started back up and his teammate was on the mound trying to preserve the jam that he got into. He
Mhm.
was on the step right by the exit of the dugout. He gets out of the inning with no runs scored. He is the first guy up out of the dugout meeting that pitcher. And that speaks to me more than anything physical that he did on the mound. I know that guy is going to be the best teammate, win or lose, if he's struggling or if he's playing well. So
Mhm.
that's something that I look for as a college coach more than anything.
I mean, we talked about it. We saw it at the at the College World Series game, right on the biggest stage. At the biggest stage, the day after Paul Skeens is pitching for LSU, he's first one out of the dugout the next day, right? And we saw it with Wake Forest and I believe Lawford. He's on a chart, right? And so it's like I remember we had that conversation on Monday night from the College World Series. Like these dudes are going to be high draft picks. They got millions of dollars guaranteed to them as long as they don't have an off the field issue, as long as they don't have an arm injury, like things like that. And yet they're still not forgetting the most important pieces sometimes aren't even in the stats or in the box score. And so I think that's a really good way to end it as well. Once again, Nick and friends taking you up to the 7 o'clock hour here. We're gonna get done a little earlier here, but once again, want to shout out the Carpe Diem team of Nebraska Realty. Whether you're looking for a new place to call home or trying to sell your current home, you want to make it as easy as possible. So why not use a realtor that works hard so you don't have to? Give the Carpe Diem team at Nebraska Realty a call today, 402 429 8121 for all your residential and commercial needs. Mason, man, appreciate you, dude. I thank you for hanging on. We went a little bit longer than I told you that I got you on the hook for, but it was really good. I think a much needed conversation. And so if you missed any of the show, you can always go back on the podcast page. You can always go back on our video stream, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. But Mason, I guess once again, thanks, dude. Appreciate it. Had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a blast, man. You you're killing the radio game, I guess. Uh, whatever that entails. You're killing it. It was awesome to kind of clash our two worlds together.
For sure.
It was awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Once again, huge thanks to Mason Bennett, assistant baseball coach, Nebraska Wesleyan. Also instructs players if you want to get your young player, baseball player, in for a lesson with Mason. You can go over to his page, his Twitter, Mason Bennett 27 on Twitter. You can also just reach out to DBAT Lincoln and get your signed up or get your son signed up to get some instruction from Mason. And if you have any questions about the recruiting process, about D3 baseball, anything like that, you want to hear more from Mason, feel free to reach out to him or reach out to me, and I'll get you his contact information. So once again, thanks to Mason Bennett. This has been another episode of Nick and Friends. Catch us next Friday right here, 6 p.m., 93.7 The Ticket, theticketfm.com. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you guys in a couple days.